and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I like to talk about books, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite books from 2024, and that is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Now, I've had this book on my radar for the longest time, but I've always had some reservations about picking it up. The first is that it's definitely a historical fiction, and that's not a genre I typically go towards. And I'm not gonna lie, the cover of this just was not selling me. It definitely plays into that historical fiction cover genre of woman walking away. That to me just never gives a really good indication of what the story is going to be about. It could be so many different things. The books that I have picked up with that cover genre, they don't typically end up resonating with me, and I don't think I'm the person they're trying to market this to. So it took me a while to get over that. The other reason it took me so long to pick this up is because this book is 350 pages, but it's also part of a quartet. So this is a 350 page book, and then there's 3 more 450 page plus books after this one. And I'm used to that kind of page count for sci-fi or fantasy, but I could not understand why a book about 2 friends growing up together would need so many pages. What is that about? That being said, I still kept this book on my TBR because every single person that I saw talk about this book, this series, Elena Ferrante in general, said it was life-changing, said it was the best thing that's ever been written, that they've ever read, and that they trust Elena Ferrante with their life. So I kept it on my TBR, and last year I finally got around to reading it. Now, I do want to speak on Elena Ferrante just for a moment, because Elena Ferrante is a pseudonym author. Her identity has remained private. She clearly wants her identity to remain private. But there's been a lot of widespread speculation that this book specifically could be at least partially autobiographical. And that doesn't seem like such a huge leap just because Elena Ferrante shares both a name and birthplace as the narrator in My Brilliant Friend. But that is a whole other deep dive that I'm not really willing or wanting to get into. Elena Ferrante wants to remain private. I'm absolutely going to respect that. Anyways, I decided to give My Brilliant Friend a shot. I read this in November of last year. Now, I won't lie, 80 to 100 pages into My Brilliant Friend, I still was not understanding why we needed so many pages. What's going on here? What are we doing? Okay? But then I read a little bit further and I realized Elena Ferrante knows exactly what she's doing. And this entire reading process, for me, it felt like I was a lobster. Let me explain, because without me even realizing it, Elena Ferrante was able to set up this perfect foundation so that these themes of generational trauma and family ties, inheritance, influence, and class structure were just simmering long enough that I didn't even realize how hot we were getting. And then all of a sudden we're in this rolling boil and the themes are just jumping off of the page. It was masterfully done. But before I get into all of my thoughts and feelings on all of that, let me give you the details. So the synopsis for this one says, from one of Italy's most acclaimed authors comes this ravishing and generous-hearted novel about a friendship that lasts a lifetime. The story of Elena and Lila begins in the 1950s in a poor but vibrant neighborhood on the outskirts of Naples. Growing up on these tough streets, the 2 girls learn to rely on each other ahead of anyone or anything else, as their friendship, beautifully and meticulously rendered, becomes a not always perfect shelter from hardship. Ferrante has created a memorable portrait of 2 women, but My Brilliant Friend is also the story of a nation. Through the lives of Elena and Lila, Ferrante gives her readers the story of a neighborhood, a city, and a country undergoing monumentous change. Again, the synopsis isn't really giving much away, but I will. There's going to be spoilers ahead. Here's your warning. So My Brilliant Friend actually starts with Elena getting a call from Lila's son. Lila and Elena are around their 60s at this point in time, and Lila's son is calling because Lila's missing. And surprisingly, Elena responds with, please for once behave like she would don't look for her. What do you mean? Just what I said. It's pointless. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet and don't call me again. And she hangs up. That's bold. Apparently, Lila has told Elena before that she wishes she could just vanish without a trace, that there's not a single scrap of her existence left to examine. And a couple days pass and she's still missing. They realize she has scraped herself from existence. She's even gone through and cut herself out of photographs, and they're gone. Elena gets angry with this. She thinks Lila has gone just way too far. It pisses her off. And so she sits down and she writes down every single memory she has of her and Lila. She writes any and every moment as proof of her existence, and that is how we are getting the Neapolitan Quartet. Elena and Lila are drawn to each other very early on in their childhood. Elena specifically says that Lila appeared in my life in 1st grade and immediately impressed me because she was very bad. They do end up circling each other for a little bit before they truly commit to being friends. Growing up in poverty in post-war Italy, there's an abundance of violence and no guarantee of an education. So the girls ended up kind of testing out each other's fears and intelligence before committing to being friends. And then inevitably they end up finding out that they can kind of go toe-to-toe with each other and challenge each other and make each other better, which is when they start to really depend on each other. One of my favorite quotes actually comes from when they start to test each other's boundaries, and they say, "We went to expose ourselves to fear and interrogate it." That ended up being one of my annotation tabs that I tracked throughout the book because it just kept coming up. The first big fear that they really face is when they have to climb the stairs to Don Akil's house. He is a man that's feared throughout their entire neighborhood. The parents fear him for his involvement in the before, and the children kind of adopt this fear and interpret it more of like a boogeyman. So Elena and Leela are playing with their dolls and they end up losing their dolls, and in their childlike minds it makes sense that this boogeyman, Don Akil, must have taken their dolls. So they climb the stairs together even though they're absolutely terrified and demand their dolls back from this man. And this man clearly did not take their dolls, but he does give them money to buy new ones. Now, this is the first of many moments where the two girls will come together and face the before. And this first time, they don't really understand the dynamics that are at play, but because the story is told through hindsight, we're able to actually see that Don Akil is so feared because of the role he played in fascist Italy and how he contributed to the violence and the poverty that is currently surrounding them. The two girls go through elementary school together, and it is very clear that both of them are very capable, very intelligent girls. However, both girls are facing immense pressure because of the fact their families are so impoverished. They're looking for essentially any and every excuse to pull these girls out of school and have them help either with a job or just around the house to lessen the burden on the family. Elena and Leela kind of end up trading back and forth praise from the teacher that they are both desperately chasing, Elena specifically, because Leela is very intelligent and it seems to come a lot easier for her than it does Elena. Ultimately, the two girls end up graduating from their elementary schools, both highly, highly successfully, and the teacher does want both of them to continue on with their studies, but Leela's parents don't really see a reason for her to continue their education. They have her just go through elementary school. They say that's enough, and then they take her out of school. Elena then continues her education through middle school and high school. Leela herself continues her own studies by borrowing books out of the library, and her and Elena kind of talk through the curriculum that Elena's working through, and that's kind of how Leela decides what books she's going to take out of the library. And this really helps both the girls. Their conversations that they have with each other obviously help Leela continue with her education on her own, but Elena is also heavily motivated by keeping up with Leela because things did just come a little bit more naturally to her. She is naturally very curious, and Elena uses that curiosity to propel her further in her own studies. And throughout their growing friendship, it's kind of funny because Elena is referring to Leela as her terrible, dazzling friend, and Leela refers to Elena as her brilliant friend. Instead of continuing with her education, Leela ends up helping her family with their family business. Her father is a shoemaker, and so she just really leans in, and she ends up dreaming about all of these shoes that she wishes she could make in this grand factory where they could produce a lot of shoes. So she ends up putting together some sketches of several pairs of shoes, and she and her brother pick one that they really want to make. Her father is not supportive of all of this dream of hers. He doesn't want either of his kids wasting their time or money or resources on making any of these shoes. He wants to do things the way that they've always been done, and so her and her brother, in secret, create one singular pair of shoes. They work their entire childhood on this one pair of shoes, and in one moment of selfishness, her brother shows the shoes to her dad. Their father is absolutely enraged that his kids did this, but Leela was able to save the shoes and hide them away. Along the same timeline, we have both girls growing up and getting attention from men. Elena is young and bases a lot of her own self-worth on how the men view her. She also pays very close attention to the fact that all of these men are paying very close attention to Leela. Elena and Leela are both confronted with unwanted attention in two different ways. Elena has always had a crush on this young, shy, intelligent boy in one of her classes, and she thinks it's totally meant to be when it turns out that his family is visiting where she's working over her working vacation. And her crush do end up getting to know each other. Unfortunately, Elena also ends up catching the attention of her crush's father, who does make unwanted physical advances at her. And it is incredibly uncomfortable. It's incredibly uncomfortable. Elena flees from this situation and goes to help Leela, because it turns out that Leela is also facing this insane situation because of a boy that they've grown up with that Leela has always hated. He's known for being violent and wealthy, has taken a liking to Leela and is determined to marry her. And because of his wealth and his connections, her parents really are encouraging this. They are encouraging him, and they are essentially ensuring that, like, doesn't matter what Leela wants, she's going to marry this man. There is only one way Leela has found, one man who she's able to attach herself to save herself from having to marry Michel, the terrible violent man, and that is Stefano. Stefano is a wealthy grocer, and he also happens to be the son of Don Achille. He has expressed an interest in Leela as well, and with Elena's help, after she returns from her working vacation, Leela is able to accept the proposal of Stefano instead of Michel. Now, Leela and Stefano appear to be a love match. Stefano is this patient man, and he's just showering Leela with attention and gifts left and right. And for a girl who's been growing up in poverty, it is a drastic shift for her. Stefano is also like one of, I think, 2 men in this entire story who is not displaying any violent tendencies. He does make romantic gestures throughout the entire story, but they are quiet and have a very clear intent. One of them is the fact that he buys Leela's shoes that she spent her entire childhood making, that her father hates. He buys those shoes from her family's business and then invests in the family business so that they can continue to make her shoes. Leela is just really, really happy throughout that entire engagement. The wedding planning process is like stressful for her, but she essentially ensures Stefano, she's like, hey, as long as Michel doesn't end up at the wedding, like coming to the wedding, I'll be totally fine. Leela and Stefano's wedding is the final act of this story, and it is really tense. The guests themselves are getting really disgruntled because it's just about every single person in the neighborhood is in attendance, and they're realizing that the wealthier guests have better food and better drinks than the poorer guests, even though the poorer guests gave more of themselves to be there. They still brought a gift even though they're really, really struggling to even exist. So there's already a lot of tension, but Leela seems to be having a really great time. That is until Michel shows up wearing her shoes, wearing the singular pair of shoes that she and her brother made, the pair of shoes that her now husband purchased. He's wearing those shoes. Elena Ferrante ended this book on a cliffhanger. How dare you? Because that's where My Brilliant Friend ends. Isn't that crazy? Okay, so I did annotate this book. The annotation categories I had for this one, I had 5 different ones. The first being terrible dazzling girl. So any like standout moments relating specifically to Leela are terrible dazzling girl. I also have dissolving margins, which is this really interesting point in the story where essentially anytime Leela is confronted or has like one of her like core beliefs challenged and reshaped, she refers to it as dissolving margins. And it's page 176, I believe. Yes, 176. The first time this happens, and she really describes it, she says, Leela imagined she saw, she felt, as if it were true, her brother break. Reno before her eyes lost the features he had as long as she could remember. The features of a generous, candid boy, the pleasing features of the reliable young man, the beloved outline of one who, as far back as she had memory, had amused, helped, and protected her. There, amid the violent explosions, in the cold and the smoke that burned the nostrils, and the strong odor of sulfur, something violated the organic structure of her brother, exercising over him a pressure so strong that it broke down his outlines. She continues, every margin collapsed, and her own margins, too, became softer and more yielding. She struggled to maintain control, and succeeded on the outside. Her anguish hardly showed. That notion of dissolving margins happens several times, not just with her brother, but with other people as well. And I have a feeling that the start of this next book will also involve some dissolving margins when she realizes that her husband has betrayed her. The other grouping of annotations I have is a continuous game of exchanges and reversals. This is one of the ways Elena refers to her friendship with Leela, that they are constantly kind of going back and forth and trading successes, and the moment that one of them is going through a really good time, the other is going through a hard time, kind of one of them gets ahead and has to like turn around, reach back and pull up the other, and that continuously happens, reverses, switches. So that was another annotation grouping that I had. I also have one for before and after. In this instance, I have before referring to anything like during war times Italy, but also before meaning like parents and before generations and their actions, fears, and beliefs that they end up passing on to their children. So after being post-war Italy, and also their children, the things they inherit, and the way that their parents impact their lives. And then I also have interrogating fear as an annotation tab, because the two girls kind of face things on directly at any chance that they can get, and it starts with Donachile and walking up those stairs and confronting him thinking that he had taken their dolls, and it just keeps going from there. So my predictions for book 2. Obviously, I have made my annotation tabs and my categories based off of not only things that are heavily present within this story, but also I think there are groups, categories, themes that we're going to keep seeing within book 2. I kind of already mentioned the fact that I think Leela is going to be confronted with some more dissolving margins as it relates to her own husband, and kind of seeing that love that she has dissolve. I can't imagine her being okay with the one thing that she said she did not want to happen at her wedding. I also think just like the title of the book, A Story of a New Name, not only Leela, what marriage is going to look like for her with a man who I foresee ending up being more violent. I think this is a violent betrayal, and it is going to be only the start of a really terrible time for Leela. And because I think that Leela will be having a terrible time, I think Elena will probably be having a better time, just because, again, that continuous game of exchanges and reversals. I think Leela will be more on her downswing, while Elena will be kind of coming up and seeing a rise. I don't know if it'll be more so her continuing her education, or if her love story that we start to see develop will continue as well. Whether or not that's going to be with the young man who is the son of the man who assaulted her is unsure about that, but we'll see how that goes. But anyways, I think that's enough speculation on what is going to happen in A Story of a New Name. I am planning on getting into that book as soon as I possibly can. If you have read My Brilliant Friend and you have any thoughts that you want to share below, please leave a comment. I'd love to talk about it more down there. While you're down there, you might as well like this video and subscribe to this channel. I will be talking more about this series as I continue reading on. And if you are still here with me today, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful day. Mwah.